In the previous lesson, we showed you how you can bring JavaScript into your web page. Now we're going to look deeper at JavaScript and the syntax of JavaScript and how we use JavaScript. So looking at comments, semicolons, and white space. So let's open up our CodePen and I'll show you how we can translate JavaScript and use the white space within JavaScript. So we noticed that at every, actually I'm going to add this HTML into CodePen. So we relatively have the same code within both. And I'm going to pick this one up too as well, copy that in, and I'm going to get rid of some of these default ones that are running and clean that up a little bit. And that's one of the really neat things about CodePen is that we've got this ability to tidy up the code whenever we need to, simply by clicking that tidy button. So there now we have that same functionality that we had in our previous lesson, but we've brought it into CodePen. And as we can see, this JS section functions as if it was a separate linked JavaScript file. So it's essentially doing that same thing where we did over here, where we do script.js and we linked to script.js. So it's doing the exact same thing. So that's the way that you can look at it, that this is kind of the same thing where it's pulling in that script information and outputting it here. So we talked about previously how semicolons are used in order to end a line of code, and we noticed that we've got the semicolon up here, we've got it here, we've got it here. So every time we've got a new command, we need to enter in semicolons. And this gives us the ability to actually add in multiple commands and separate them out logically. And you'll see that when they've got JavaScript, when they minify it, they get rid of a lot of the white space. So what minify means is that it essentially takes your JavaScript. So I'm going to just copy that, and I just opened up jscompress.com here, and this gives me the ability to compress my JavaScript, and I can really easily compress it into getting rid of all the white space and setting it more in a compressed format. And the reason that we use minifying is that it allows the web pages to load a little bit quicker, so it reduces the load times, the bandwidth that's needed, and it also really streamlines a lot of that processing of the JavaScript. So there is a difference, especially if you have a really big JavaScript file. You should compress it when you do place it online, and of course when it is compressed, it's not as readable. So you can bring it back into even something like CodePen, and you could just simply click tidy, and that will decompress it and allow you to make it more readable when you're working with it. And the other thing with compressing is that we see that it gets rid of some comments, white space that's not needed in the actual execution of the JavaScript. And much like with HTML, we've got extra spacing that we can put and place that within JavaScript. And we'll find that it still will function properly, but you do need to be careful where you're placing the spacing. So just like with your HTML, you don't want to put it within where you're identifying it. So if you place it within the ID here, so it wouldn't understand that this is ID. Much the same for JavaScript. We have to make sure that we're not placing spacing like something like in document. So we see right away we get this exclamation mark here in CodePen, because it's gonna interpret this as a separate value, or try to look and define it as a variable. So you want to make sure that whenever you've got these predefined functions, that you're not breaking them apart with white space. And of course you can add in white space in between these functions. So you could add in as much white space as you want, and it simply just ignores that. But always be careful with the white space, and also when you're doing something like alert. So unlike with your HTML, so if I wanted to create spacing between the alert, I can't just simply bring it to a new line. Again, I'm breaking apart that function, and as soon as I've got these new lines, we see we get this exclamation mark, and we're not actually interpreting this as one line of code anymore. It's looking for an end of this code. So be careful with how you're using white space. So I'm going to just simply remove out that white space that was just created and bring it all back into one line. And we see as soon as we place it within one line, we've got that ability that this is again going to be treated as that one line. And when we click it, we see that unlike with HTML, all of that spacing is still interpreted within the string. So unlike HTML, spacing within the string between the quotes is going to be interpreted and output within the output of JavaScript. So it does render it out and it does treat it as spacing. So you're probably wondering, well, what if I do want a new line? How do I do that? And that's where we use something like \n or something like that, and that gives you, or it should be the other way around there, and that gives you line break. So this is typical text formatted line break characters. So whenever we do this \, not the /, but the \n, it breaks to a new line, and we can see that in the output here where we've got hello world and world is on a new line. And then of course we could add these as needed and we could end up with multiple new lines. Another thing that's commonly used within JavaScript is commenting. So sometimes when we're writing JavaScript code, we use commenting in order to better define what we were trying to do and what we were trying to accomplish. So test out line breaks. So we see that it's CodePen actually grays it out. And when we type in this with the 2 slashes there, that this gets ignored. And this is more for someone coming in and trying to read the code in order to better understand what was being done within this code. So this doesn't get rendered out by the user, but it's used by developers in order to indicate what the purpose of something was and for documentation of their source code. Now there's another way to create commenting. So if you had multiple lines of comments, or if you simply want to comment out a bunch of your code, you can do it this way as well. So right here I'm just going to add in this as a comment, and of course we can add as many lines in here now as needed. And as well, if we want to simply comment out a block of code, we don't want it functioning anymore, we can use that same format and comment out entire section, block of code. And I'm giving an error because I've got it outside of there as well. So when I do tidy that up, we see that this just gets treated as a comment. So this code no longer runs. So when I click me 3, nothing is going to happen. And of course, when I remove out that commenting, then we get the functionality again. And of course, that this is a comment isn't going to work because of the fact that this was being treated as a value that it doesn't understand, because it's not wrapped within a function and it's got no colon there, so it doesn't really know what to make of it, so it just simply throws an error. And another thing to note about JavaScript, when it does throw an error, it might stop processing the rest of the source code. So this, again, depending on the browser and the type of error, but sometimes when you throw an error, then you do get issues with rendering out the rest of your JavaScript. So always be mindful of the way that you're handling your JavaScript, and if you do have an error, address it immediately before you continue writing your JavaScript code. In the next lesson, we're going to be looking at those fundamental core concepts of JavaScript. And we're going to start writing some more functional JavaScript and show you how to create the foundations for building out more complex code in JavaScript. And it's going to be really easy and straightforward to create some amazing functionality in JavaScript. So all of that is coming up in the next lessons.